the Prime Minister today evening would be formally inaugurating the Startup India campaign. I consciously use the word campaign because at the end of the day, it's going to be a program with which the government would only be at an arm's length. As Mrs. Sitaraman said, essentially a facilitator with very little or virtually negligible role in day-to-day interventions in this business. I must confess that we normally have a large number of formal launches in this plenary hall of the Vignana Bhavan, but this one is with a difference. A difference because it's probably the first time that I see a large number of potential entrepreneurs here, most of whom, at least I must confess, I am not familiar with. Otherwise, at all these formal launches, we always have the usual suspects. And that itself is indicative of the break that Startup India is going to make with what conventional economy and the formal launches of programs in the conventional economy itself are. I think another very significant difference of what makes it a landmark event is a final break or the ultimate break that you have with the conventional license Raj of India. We ostensibly broke away from it in 1991. I am certainly not a great favorite with those who supported the idea of that license Raj even at that moment, because that was conceived with an idea that the government would decide as to what businesses can be carried on and by whom they could be carried on. The government would also decide the geographical locations and the volumes of those businesses. And the entire intention or the eventual consequence of that was to restrict the energies of the people, to constrain them, and find virtues in that constrained economy itself. We did well to break off from it in 1991, but the break was only partial. It was partial because who would be funded? There was an invisible role of the state, control over land, land permissions, foreign investment proposals, environmental clearances, and of course, unless the political nods came to venture into newer areas which involved a lot of capital, a lot of energy going into it, an entrepreneur or an investor were normally reluctant. Our effort over the last few years has been to restrict the role of the state essentially as a facilitator or in policy domain. When Prime Minister Modi was voted to power in 2014, if I look back at the changes and the direction of the changes in which we moved in, I think some of them are extremely significant. I find that the traffic of industry visiting North Block has almost ended. There are no piles of FIPB clearances which are pending. There are no files to be pushed. Amitabh is being called repeatedly an evangelist because the DIPP was the corridor in which most people visited in order to have their proposals supported by the government. Its role is now one of a campaigner. Its role is now one of an enabler. And I think these are extremely important changes which have taken place. And then the Prime Minister's own idea, and this I must confess was his original idea, that this is the world where startups need to be encouraged. Last year in the budget, I had even suggested a startup fund for helping the creation of the startups. Needless to say, both the banking system and the government would make the resources available. We've already worked upon an entrepreneur-friendly taxation regime. There are some steps which can be taken by notifications, which would be taken forthwith. Others require a legislative provision which can only come as a part of the finance bill when the next budget is presented, in order to create a friendly taxation regime for startups. And we expect the new India, taking a cue from those Indians who elsewhere in the world, particularly in the Silicon Valley, which has sent a very large delegation here, utilize their sense of entrepreneurship, their sense of innovation, generated ideas and created wealth. And in turn, that wealth now is being used to supplement and support future startups across the country and elsewhere in the world. As I said in the beginning, that this would be literally the final break with the license Raj, because the regime intended to be created is to give a complete freedom from the state. The more this sector becomes unregulated, I think the better it will be in the interest of the segment. One of the reasons over the last 2 decades why India became an important IT center was because we had no laws governing the field. And I think this entire campaign is intended to create a supportive system, and that's the role of the state. And the rest really is your own sense of entrepreneurship. We are deeply encouraged by the extent of response that we visited, which we witnessed over the last few days. In hindsight, I think it would have been even understandable if this, notwithstanding the cold winter today, this function had been held in a stadium, because that's the number of people who wanted to attend this function and identified with this, the Startup India launch itself. Because this is an area where people want a complete ecosystem which is friendly to innovation, which is friendly to enterprise, where the best ideas in the world would be created. And those ideas leading to innovation would perhaps provide this country the best that is yet to be seen. Let me, towards the end, congratulate the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, my colleague Mrs. Sitaraman and Mr. Amitabh Kant and all their colleagues for having taken this great initiative. And let me express a hope that somewhere in this auditorium and elsewhere where people, potential entrepreneurs, are listening to us, probably there are some world beaters somewhere in this crowd. And I'm sure over the next few years we'll create that environment where you'll all become very powerful names to reckon with. We'll all be very proud of you. Thank you very much.
बीजेपी व श्री नरेंद्र मोदी ने लोकसभा चुनाव के दौरान देश व जनहित में और खासकर गरीबों, दलितों, आदिवासियों